I've always been a quiet person. Maybe too quiet, at least compared to the rest of my family. Growing up, I learned early that blending in was the easiest way to stay out of trouble. My brother, Charlie, was the opposite. He always commanded attention with his loud voice, his jokes that made everyone laugh, even if they weren't all that funny. My parents adored it. I watched as he was praised, adored, and even given extra privileges simply because he could be the center of attention. But for me, I was the background noise, the one who quietly cleaned up after everyone else, who quietly picked up the pieces when things went wrong. It wasn't that I didn't matter. It was just that no one seemed to notice unless something was broken or needed fixing. As I got older, that dynamic didn't change. I stayed in the background, keeping things together, while my brother continued to be the loud, entertaining one. And that was fine by me. I never felt the need to compete. It just made sense. Charlie was the one who got all the praise, and I was the one who kept the family from falling apart when things went wrong. That was my place, and I accepted it. Then, after my divorce, life threw me another curveball. I found myself moving back into the house where I grew up. It wasn't something I had planned on. The house was large, too large, for just me and my 14-year-old son, Theo. But it was familiar. It was the house where I had spent all my summers as a kid, and even though the place was starting to show its age, I figured I'd make it work. For Theo, it wasn't a terrible idea either. It was where his grandparents had always lived, and he had spent countless weekends visiting them. There was comfort in the familiarity, even if it was just a house. One afternoon, Theo and I came back to the house to find my parents in the midst of what appeared to be another renovation. I could immediately smell the paint, hear the buzzing of power tools, and see the changes they were making around the house. It felt off somehow, like there was something more happening here than just updating a few rooms. Something was different. "Mom, what's going on?" I asked as I stepped inside, Theo trailing behind me. "Just a little update," my mom said, brushing her hands on her jeans like she had been busy. I knew better. She didn't get her hands dirty. "We're fixing up the basement for your brother's family. You know how the kids are always complaining about not having enough space." I nodded, though the tightening in my stomach told me that something wasn't right. My parents were always quick to make changes for Charlie and his family, but for me and Theo, it felt like we were never considered. It was the same story again. My brother's family came first, always. My son, Theo, wasn't a kid anymore. He was growing up fast, and I could tell it would be hard for him to adjust to a new routine, especially in a house that felt more like it was built for others. He needed space to grow, room to find his own voice. But there it was. The basement was being revamped for Charlie's kids, as if Theo didn't matter. I could already feel that invisible weight pressing on my chest. This wasn't just about space. This was about priorities. And somehow, Theo and I weren't on the list. As we walked through the house, the renovations felt more like statements than improvements. The new light fixtures in the hallway were too bright, too modern for a place that had always felt like home. My father, who was always tinkering with something, was in the garage overseeing the installation of an air hockey table, a distraction more than anything else. The air was thick with the scent of sawdust and cheap wood, and it made my throat tighten. It was all too new, too forced. This wasn't the house I remembered. It felt as if my parents were trying to rewrite their past, erasing the old, comfortable things in favor of what they thought would make them happy now. But what about me? What about Theo? Theo, though, seemed to be holding it together better than I was. He wasn't saying much, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. His gaze flicked from one room to the next, as if he was trying to figure out where he fit in all of this. The house, once familiar and comforting, was now a strange place to him. He'd grown so much in the last few years, and even though he'd spent countless weekends here as a kid, this house was starting to feel foreign. He deserved so much more than this. I tried to focus on something positive, something that might make Theo feel a little more at ease. "You want to check out your old room?" I asked, though I already knew what I'd find. Theo had spent most of his younger years in the small bedroom upstairs, but it had always been too cramped for him. He was a teenager now, and it was hard for me to ignore how much he had outgrown this place. "Sure," he muttered, following me up the stairs. We walked down the hall toward the room he used to love, but as we reached the door, something caught my eye. A big empty space. Where the piano had always been. The grand piano, the one passed down from my Theo's great-grandmother, was gone. I froze. I scanned the room, hoping it had just been moved to another spot. But no, there was nothing. Just an empty space where the piano had always sat, its polished wood gleaming like a promise of something important. A legacy. My mind raced. I couldn't breathe. Where was it? "Mom," Theo whispered, his voice small. "Where's my piano?" I turned to him, but my throat tightened and I couldn't speak. My mind scrambled, trying to come up with an explanation, but none came. I couldn't lie to him. The piano was gone. His great-grandmother's piano. The one that was supposed to be his. The one I had fought to keep in the family, to preserve for him. It was more than just an instrument. It was his inheritance. It was something he deserved. Something that symbolized his talent, his potential. "Mom, where is it?" Theo asked again, this time with more force, his voice trembling with confusion and hurt. I didn't have an answer. My heart was in my throat as I walked out of the room. The rest of the house felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing in, suffocating. I moved to the kitchen, hoping to find my parents, hoping they could explain, though I knew deep down I already knew what they'd say. My mom and dad sat at the kitchen table, as if nothing was wrong. My dad, as usual, didn't even look up from his tablet. "Where's the piano?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. My mom looked up slowly, the faintest trace of guilt flickering in her eyes before she masked it. "We sold it," she said, as if it were the most casual thing in the world. My heart dropped. "You sold it?" I repeated, disbelief flooding my voice. "You sold Theo's piano?" My dad shrugged, still not looking up. "It was sitting there, taking up space. Theo didn't need it anymore. We sold it to a collector. Got a good price for it." Theo's face went pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. I could see the hurt creeping in, the realization that something so important, something that had always been his, was taken from him without even a thought, without any regard for what it meant. I felt my fists clench. Anger swelled inside me, but I forced it down. I turned to face them both, fury and sadness mixing in a cocktail of emotion I could barely contain. "That was Theo's?" I said, my voice low, trembling with restraint. "It wasn't yours to sell." My mom's face tightened, and she waved a hand dismissively. "Relax. It was just collecting dust. Theo doesn't even play anymore." Theo had been practicing in the living room, his favorite songs filling the house with music. Music he loved. Music that defined him. But they didn't see that. They didn't care. They were too wrapped up in their own world, focused on improving their lives in ways that had nothing to do with me or Theo. I felt Theo's hand slip into mine, and I squeezed it, trying to give him something to hold on to, but inside I was already boiling over. "You sold it without asking us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the weight of the betrayal settling in. "Relax," my dad said again. "We did what was best." And right then I knew. I knew that I couldn't let this slide. Not again. Not when it was something so important, so personal. Theo deserved better than this. I wouldn't let them take that from him. Not this time. Not ever again. I walked out of the room without saying another word, my mind spinning, heart racing. I couldn't stay there anymore. Not with them. Not with the house that had suddenly become a strange place. I could feel Theo behind me, his quiet footsteps following as I stormed into the backyard. The sight of the pool construction, more expensive than anything I had ever expected, only fueled the anger building inside me. The sound of heavy machinery, the scent of freshly poured concrete, it all seemed so out of place in a house that was supposed to be about family, about tradition, about something real. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the half-finished pool, trying to wrap my head around the fact that my parents had sold Theo's piano, the piano that had been passed down through generations, the piano that was supposed to belong to him, and now it was gone. Sold to some collector for a quick buck. To fund a pool. A pool. It didn't make sense. None of it did. "Mom, are we gonna leave?" Theo asked quietly, breaking me from my thoughts. I looked over at him, and my heart sank at the look on his face. He was trying so hard to stay strong, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. Theo was the kind of kid who rarely showed emotion, but when he did, it hit you like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just upset about the piano, it was everything. The feeling of being invisible, of being overlooked. It was all coming to the surface now. I knelt down beside him, pulling him into a hug. "We're going to figure this out," I said, though I wasn't sure how. I didn't have any answers for him, but I knew one thing. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let my parents get away with treating Theo like he didn't matter. I wouldn't let him grow up thinking this was how things were supposed to be, that this kind of treatment was normal. That night, I stayed up late, pacing around the house. I couldn't stop thinking about my grandmother. She had always been the one to keep us grounded, the one who understood the importance of family and legacy. She'd always been a pillar of strength, and I knew if anyone could help me, it was her. I picked up my phone, hesitated for a moment, and then dialed her number. "Hello?" she answered, her voice warm as always. "Grandma?" I said, my voice tight. "I need your help." She listened quietly as I explained everything. The piano, the pool, the way my parents had completely disregarded Theo's feelings. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear her thinking, her sharp mind piecing everything together. "Don't worry," she said finally. "I'll take care of it." And that was all she said. Just those 4 words. But something in the way she said it gave me the hope I desperately needed. My grandma always had a way of handling things. She didn't raise her voice, didn't make a scene. She just made things right. The next day, I returned to my parents' house, feeling a mix of dread and determination. I needed answers. I needed to confront them. But this time, I wouldn't be quiet. I wouldn't let them push me aside like they always did. I found my dad in the garage, fiddling with some tools. The moment he saw me, he stiffened, as if preparing for a confrontation. "Where's the piano?" I demanded again, my voice steady this time, not trembling with the uncertainty I had felt before. My dad didn't even look up from his work. "I told you. We sold it. It's gone." "You didn't just sell it," I snapped, stepping closer. "You took something that didn't belong to you. You sold my son's inheritance. You didn't even ask us, and now you expect us to be okay with it? To just accept it?" My dad finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than indifference in his eyes. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't remorse. It was fear. Fear of what was coming. "Look, Emily," he began, but I cut him off. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not going to let you get away with this. You can't just take something that was meant for Theo and sell it like it was nothing. He matters. You can't treat him like he's invisible anymore." My dad opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't let him. I had made up my mind. I wasn't backing down. "Don't worry about the piano," I said, turning to leave. "I'll handle it." I didn't wait for him to respond. I didn't need to. I knew what I had to do next. I walked back to my car, my heart pounding. It wasn't over. It wasn't over until Theo got his piano back. I didn't waste any time. The moment I got in the car, I called my grandma again, this time with more urgency. "Grandma, I need your help now," I said, the words coming out faster than I meant. "I can't let them get away with this. I need to fix it, for Theo." My grandma's voice was calm, always steady, but I could hear the underlying sharpness in her words. "You're not going to do this alone. I'll handle it, but you need to trust me." I swallowed hard, trying to push down the knot of nerves that had been building up since the moment I found out about the piano. "I trust you," I said, though I didn't fully know what she meant by handling it. She didn't say much more after that, but something about her confidence steadied me, like maybe everything was going to be okay after all. The next day, I was back at my parents' house, heart racing with anticipation. The renovations were almost done. My brother's family was already starting to settle into their new space, making themselves at home in ways that stung, even though I wasn't supposed to care. Theo was with me, though he didn't say much. His silence spoke volumes. He hadn't forgotten about the piano, and neither had I. But I was determined to fix this, to show him that he wasn't invisible, that he wasn't second tier in his own family. I walked into the kitchen to find my mom sitting at the table, flipping through a magazine. She didn't look up as I approached, but I could feel the tension building between us, thick as smoke. My dad wasn't in the room, probably hiding out in the garage again, avoiding the mess he'd created. "Where's the piano?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. My mom's eyes flickered briefly before she put the magazine down, her gaze not quite meeting mine. I already told you, she said. It's gone. It's better that way. You need to stop making this a bigger deal than it is. I felt my anger flare, but I kept my voice steady. It was never yours to sell, Mom. It wasn't just a piano. It was Theo's legacy, his inheritance, and you treated it like it didn't matter. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, and for a second, I thought maybe something in her was starting to realize how wrong this was. But then she straightened her posture and waved me off. You're overreacting. It wasn't the end of the world. You should be grateful we've done so much for this house, for your brother's family. They needed the space, and you know it. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. No, Mom, you don't get it. You've never gotten it. It wasn't just about space, it was about respect, and you completely disregarded that. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang, and my mom shot me an exasperated glance before getting up to answer it. I stood still, my mind racing. I had no idea who it could be, but the sense of something shifting, something in motion, made me hold my ground. The moment I heard the voices at the door, I knew exactly who had come to make things right. My grandma entered the room, cool and collected, with a lawyer by her side. Andrew, the lawyer, was holding a slim folder that caught the light as he moved. My mom's face went pale at the sight of them. My dad appeared in the hallway, his face pinched with tension as he realized who had arrived. My grandma didn't waste time with pleasantries. She didn't need to. She looked directly at my parents and said, calmly but with undeniable authority, I heard you sold the piano. My mom opened her mouth to respond, but my grandma cut her off with a single raised hand. You didn't own it. You had no right to sell it. It was Theo's. And now, I'm here to make sure he gets it back. My dad stepped forward, his face turning red. What is this, Margaret? He asked, his voice strained. We sold it. It was a family asset. It was just sitting there. My grandma's gaze was unflinching. It wasn't a family asset. It was a family trust, and you sold something you had no right to. You'll face the consequences. The lawyer, Andrew, stepped forward and handed my parents a packet of papers. This is a notice of eviction, he said, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that made the air feel thicker. You have 60 days to vacate the property. My mom's face crumpled, and my dad looked like he might collapse. You can't do this, my mom protested, but it was too late. My grandma had already spoken. She had already acted. I stood there, watching the scene unfold, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to keep quiet. I didn't have to let them take everything from Theo. My grandma had made sure of that. This was happening. Theo was getting his piano back. Theo's eyes met mine, and I saw something in them that had been missing for weeks. A glimmer of hope, a feeling of belonging. He wasn't invisible anymore, and neither was I. It wasn't just about the piano. It was about standing up for what mattered, for family, for respect. It was about showing Theo that sometimes when you're pushed to the edge, you have to fight back. And when you do, you get what's yours. The lawyer handed over the final papers, and as my parents stood there, stunned and speechless, my grandma turned to me, her expression softening just a little. Go home, she said gently. You've done enough for today. I nodded, and as I walked out of the house with Theo, I finally felt like I was walking away from something that didn't belong to me anymore. My parents' selfishness, their manipulation, their disregard for the family I was trying to protect. I knew we were going to be okay. The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling, like a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized was there. Theo and I spent the next week living in a kind of quiet peace. The shock of everything that had happened still lingered, but somehow the tension in the house had shifted. My parents didn't speak to me. They didn't call to apologize, didn't ask for an explanation. The phone never rang. And though I tried to tell myself that I didn't care, I could feel the coldness settling in, creeping into the space between us like it had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to make itself known. Theo, for his part, was quieter than usual. He wasn't angry, at least not in the way I expected. He was more withdrawn, contemplative, as if he was trying to make sense of the mess his family had created. I saw him spending more time in his room, playing his guitar quietly, working through his thoughts the only way he knew how. I didn't push him to talk. I knew this was something he needed to process on his own. But every time I looked at him, my heart ached for the innocence he had lost. He wasn't just the kid who played music anymore. He was the kid who had learned that people in his family, people who were supposed to protect him, could take things from him without a second thought. And that hurt me in ways I couldn't fully express. Then came the phone call from Grandma. It was early one morning, just as the sun was starting to filter through the kitchen window. I had just made my coffee, and Theo was still asleep upstairs. I picked up the phone, my heart already beating faster than usual. "Hello?" "Emily." Grandma's voice was steady, her usual calm never faltering. "It's done." I sat up straighter in my chair, instinctively knowing what she meant. "The piano?" I asked. "Yes," she said, her voice warm with satisfaction. "It was returned this morning. The collector knew better than to argue once he realized the legal situation. The paperwork was clear, and I made sure he understood that Theo's inheritance is not for sale. It never was." I could hear the faintest smile in her voice, and for the first time in weeks, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "You really did it." "I told you I would," she replied, her tone gentle but firm. "But now, it's up to you to help Theo understand that he is worthy of being fought for. Don't let him think this was just about the piano. It's about more than that. He has a right to be seen, Emily. Never forget that." I promised her that I wouldn't. I knew she was right. This wasn't just about an object. It was about Theo's worth. It was about his place in this world, in this family. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my own parents, make him feel like he didn't belong. After the call, I went upstairs to Theo's room. I knocked lightly on his door, and he called out, "Yeah?" I opened it slowly, careful not to interrupt whatever moment he was having. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, guitar in hand, staring out the window. His expression was peaceful, almost lost in thought. I could tell he hadn't been asleep for long. "Hey," I said softly, taking a seat beside him. "I just wanted to let you know that the piano's been returned. It's back where it belongs." Theo's eyes flicked to mine, and for a second I wasn't sure what I was going to see there, but then his lips curved upward, a small but genuine smile breaking through. It was the first time in a long while that I saw that smile, the one that came from a place of relief, not from pretending everything was fine. "Really?" he asked quietly, as if he didn't quite believe it himself. "Really?" I nodded. "It's yours again, and I'm sorry it took all of this for it to happen, but we got it back, and it's not going anywhere." He took a deep breath, then set the guitar down on the bed beside him. "Thanks, Mom." His voice was soft but full of meaning. "I knew you'd do something." I didn't know what to say to that, but I didn't need to say anything. I just pulled him into a hug, holding him close like I could protect him from everything that had hurt him. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. Later that day, we made the drive to my grandmother's house to pick up the piano. I watched Theo's eyes light up as we entered her living room and saw it, his piano, sitting right where it had always been. He walked up to it, ran his fingers over the keys like they were old friends, and for the first time in weeks, I saw him truly smile. It wasn't just the piano that had been returned. It was something bigger, something he had lost, but was finally getting back. His confidence, his sense of belonging. And I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning of him learning to take up space in this world, to be seen for who he was, someone worthy of being fought for. As Theo played the first few notes of a song, I leaned back against the wall, letting the music wash over me. It was beautiful, not because it was perfect, but because it was his. It always had been. And now no one could take that away from him. We were finally home. The days after we got the piano back were quieter, not in a way that felt heavy or awkward, but in a way that allowed us both to breathe again. Theo spent hours in the living room, practicing songs he hadn't touched in weeks, his fingers finding the keys like they'd never left. I didn't interrupt him. I let the sound fill the house, a soft and steady reminder that, despite everything, we still had something real, something no one could take away from us. My parents didn't call. Not that I expected them to, but the silence was louder than anything they could have said. The day after the piano was returned, I stopped by their house to pick up some things I'd left behind. I had no intention of having a conversation, but as soon as I walked in, I could feel the shift. They were both sitting at the kitchen table, looking tense, avoiding eye contact with me. I walked past them, grabbing what I needed from the counter, trying to ignore the heavy air between us. "Emily, wait," my mom said quietly, her voice holding a note of hesitation I hadn't heard before. I'm sorry." I stopped in my tracks, my hand still on the doorframe. I hadn't expected an apology, at least not so soon. I turned around slowly, not sure what to say. "I know we made a mistake," she continued, her voice almost too soft to hear. "We didn't think about how it would affect you or Theo. We were wrong." I didn't know how to respond to that. I'd spent so much time preparing myself for this moment, but now that it was here, I couldn't find the words. All the anger and frustration I'd been holding on to over the past few weeks felt too big to say all at once. Instead, I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know," I said simply, "but it's done now. You can't take back what happened." She didn't argue. She just sat there, looking at me with a kind of sorrow in her eyes I hadn't seen before. For a long moment, we were both quiet, and I realized that sometimes an apology wasn't about fixing everything. It was just about acknowledging what had been broken. "I just want you to know I'm sorry for how it all went down," she said, her eyes finally meeting mine. "And I'll do better. For Theo, for you." I didn't respond at first. What could I say? It wasn't that easy. The hurt wasn't going to disappear overnight. But I appreciated that she had finally said it, that she had finally acknowledged what had happened. "I'll believe it when I see it," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "But actions speak louder than words, Mom." She nodded, and I could see the shame on her face, though I couldn't tell if it was because she was sorry or because she was frustrated that she couldn't fix it all with a few simple words. I turned to leave, not looking back. I had no illusions that everything would be fine between us from now on. There was too much history there, too many things left unsaid, too much damage done. But I knew that I couldn't carry the weight of all of it anymore. I had to let go of the anger. I had to focus on what mattered. And that was Theo, my son, the one person who had been hurt the most in all of this. When I got home, Theo was sitting at the piano, his head down, his fingers gliding over the keys in a way that made the air feel lighter. I watched him for a moment, then walked over and sat beside him. "How are you doing?" I asked quietly, my voice soft. He looked up at me, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I'm okay," he said, his voice steady. "Better, now that it's back." I smiled, relieved that he was finally starting to heal. He'd been through so much, but I knew now that he was stronger than I'd ever realized. And that made me proud. "I'm sorry for everything that happened," I said, reaching out and squeezing his shoulder. He shrugged, a look of understanding crossing his face. "It wasn't your fault, Mom. You got it back for me. That's all that matters." And in that moment, I knew he was right. The piano wasn't just an instrument. It was a symbol of something much deeper, of respect, of family, and of knowing that sometimes the only way to get through the hardest moments is to stand up and fight for what's yours. I sat with him as he played, the sound filling the house, this time with a warmth I hadn't felt in months. We were starting to find our way back to each other, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe things would be okay after all. The next few weeks felt like a quiet kind of victory. Things didn't change overnight, of course. My parents didn't suddenly become the family I had always hoped for, and there were still moments where the tension between us was palpable. But the weight of the situation had shifted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. Theo was settling back into a routine, and his music, once strained and disconnected, was flowing again. The piano had become more than just an instrument. It had become a symbol of something reclaimed. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about him having a place, a voice, a space where he wasn't invisible. I spent more time at home with Theo, watching him play, listening to him talk about his day, feeling the small moments of connection that had been missing for so long. It was simple, but it was everything. The music in the background, the quiet conversations over dinner, the laughter that came in fits and starts, but still felt genuine. We were finding our rhythm again. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I didn't hear much from my parents after that conversation. They were avoiding me, and I couldn't say I blamed them. There was a kind of unresolved silence hanging between us, but it was different now. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been. I had let go of the need to make them understand everything. They probably never would, and that was something I had to accept. I had my boundaries, and I wasn't going to let them cross them again. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang while I was making lunch. It was my mom. I didn't hesitate. I picked up, not knowing what to expect. "Emily?" Her voice was tentative, almost apologetic. "We need to talk." I sat down at the kitchen table, trying to keep my voice steady. "What about?" "About Theo," she said quietly, "and about the piano." The words hung in the air for a long moment, and I couldn't tell if I was ready to have this conversation. But I couldn't avoid it forever. "Okay," I said. "Let's talk." I just wanted to say that I know I messed up," she started, her voice softer than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about Theo and the piano. I didn't realize how much it meant to him or to you. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The apology wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I needed to hear, but it was enough. Enough to make me realize that, for once, she was seeing things from my side. I couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, we could move forward. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied, my voice quiet but firm. "But it's not just about the piano, Mom. It's about respect, about Theo knowing that he matters, that he's not just an afterthought." "I know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I understand now. I've been selfish, and I've been blind. I should have never let things get this far." I didn't know what to say. There was so much left unsaid between us, so many years of misunderstandings. But in that moment, I realized that the apology, though long overdue, wasn't just for Theo or me. It was for her, too. Maybe she had finally come to terms with the kind of parent she had been and the kind she wanted to be. Maybe this was the first step towards something better. "I'm glad you see it that way," I said finally. "I really am. But we can't just keep pretending like everything's okay. It's going to take time." "I know," she replied. "I'm not asking for everything to be fixed right away. I just want a chance to show you both that I can do better. For you, for Theo." I sat back, letting her words sink in. I hadn't expected her to say any of this. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we might be able to rebuild something. Slowly, carefully, but with purpose. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. "All right," I said, my voice steady but soft. "We'll take it one step at a time." I hung up the phone, the weight in my chest lightening just a little. It wasn't perfect. It might never be perfect. But maybe, just maybe, things could be different now. And that was enough for me. The weeks that followed that conversation with my mom were an unexpected mix of healing and tension. My parents, still uncertain and somewhat uncomfortable, began making slow attempts to reach out. Not in the way I expected, but in ways that felt less about obligation and more about trying to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. There were small gestures. My mom bringing over a home-cooked meal one night, my dad texting to check in on Theo's school project, both things that felt almost foreign, but, at the same time, incredibly important. I wasn't sure where this was going, but I knew I didn't want to give up on the possibility of something better. Theo and I kept our lives moving forward, but there was a noticeable shift in how we both carried ourselves. Theo, who had always been the quiet, thoughtful one, started to open up more. It wasn't just the piano that had been returned to him. He'd gotten something more: his confidence, his sense of self, and a quiet understanding that he was worth fighting for. There were days when I caught him smiling at something on his phone, a text from a friend or a funny meme, and it wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was real joy. I saw him letting himself take up space, and I could feel the weight of all the things he'd been holding back for months finally lifting. As for me, I was learning to forgive, not just my parents, but myself. I had spent so long focusing on what had been taken from us that I hadn't given myself enough credit for what I had fought to keep. I had fought for Theo. I had fought for our future. And in the process, I had started to see my own strength, a strength I didn't know I had until it was tested. I wasn't perfect, but I was learning, and that was enough for now. One afternoon, about a month after the phone call with my mom, I found myself at the piano with Theo, sitting beside him as he played something new he had written. It was a simple melody, but the way he played it, so sure, so confident, told me everything I needed to know. He had found his voice again. It wasn't just the notes that mattered. It was how they made him feel. The music was his way of processing everything: the piano, the house, the family, the mess. And in that moment, I felt like everything we had been through had led us to this moment of peace. Theo looked up at me as his fingers paused on the keys. "You know, Mom, I'm glad we're doing okay now." I smiled at him, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Yeah, me too." He went back to playing, his fingers gliding over the keys like they were part of him, like they always had been. I leaned back, letting the sound fill the room, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could let go of the past. Maybe my parents would never fully understand everything, but that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what we were building now together. We didn't need their approval to know we were worthy. We already had that in each other. As Theo finished the song, he looked up again, his smile wide and genuine. "I think this one's my favorite." I laughed softly, feeling a warmth spread through me. "It's mine too." And just like that, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. We were going to be okay. We were enough. And nothing, no one could take that away. Life can throw challenges our way, and sometimes we feel like things are being taken from us. But remember, the real power lies in standing up for what matters most: yourself, your values, and the people who truly care. Don't let others diminish your worth or rob you of your voice. Fight for what's yours, but also know when to let go and move forward. We all have the strength to rebuild, to find our place, and to live with purpose. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe so you don't miss the next video.